Good morning. Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn and I'm very pleased to be your Director of Music Ministries. I'd like to invite you to join in the singing this morning with hymn number 360 in the gray hymnal. Hymn number 360, Here We Have Gathered. Please rise in body or in spirit and join in the singing. And we have a verse that has women, children, men. Please feel free to use words that resonate with you if those do not. We use inclusive language in our church. Number 360. This morning is in the turquoise hymnal, number 1021, Lean on Me. Song number 1021 in the turquoise book.
Always
this morning is number 1051. Number 1051 in the same book, We Are. This also has gendered language, which you're welcome to replace with siblings and cousins, people, ones, beings, the words that match your heart for each child that's born. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe of who we are. Each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe of who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandmother's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and mothers of tongue. We are people of dust and the ones of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and givers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandmother's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the ones of great fortunes. We are sisters of mercy and people of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We are seekers of truth and givers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are grandmother's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe of who we are. Good morning. Please take a moment and greet your neighbors.
As the kindling of this chalice calls us to community, let there be light. As the flame of this chalice reminds us of our values, let there be light. As the glow of this chalice encourages us to hope, let there be light.
I'd like to invite you to join your hearts and minds in the spirit of worship with these words adapted from Robert Bella. Just when we are in many ways moving to an ever greater validation of the sacredness of the individual person, our capacity to imagine a social fabric that would hold individuals together is vanishing. This is in part because of the fact that our ethical individualism is linked to an economic individualism that ironically knows nothing of the sacredness of the individual. It is only what economic individualism destroys and what our kind of religious individualism has not been able to restore is solidarity, a sense of being members of the same body. What provides some notion that we are in this together, that we need each other, that our precious and unique selves are not going to make it all alone?
For centuries, parents have brought their children to holy places to present them to their community, to bless them, to dedicate them in faith. As we gather together on Father's Day, we are particularly mindful of the hope and promise that young life can bring. These parents today have brought their child to this religious community to be dedicated. We bless and dedicate their child out of our own commitment as a congregation to their religious, spiritual, and emotional growth. Through this ritual, we join these parents in their concern and compassion for these young lives. We add our commitment to theirs in the knowledge that all of us will share the responsibility for this child. By this dedication, we acknowledge the full place of this child among us. By this dedication, we give thanks for who they are and who they will become. By this dedication, we celebrate the holiness in every human heart. By this dedication, we express our sincere commitment to love and nurture this child as part of our larger family. Would Ashley Cole and Rachel Rogers please come forward with the child to be dedicated?
Ashley and Rachel, in presenting your child at this service, you invite all of us to share the joy and the responsibility that is yours as her caregiver. Is this your wish? Yes. Okay. For our ritual of dedication, we use water and a rose. The water is part of nature's abundance, water that touches every shore and nourishes all people. This water we use today comes from our water communion ceremony and therefore represents this gathered community. The rose expresses symbolically our hope that this child will unfold and blossom just as she must in all of her own unique and natural beauty. By what name is this child known? Ellis Bird. May your thoughts be wise. Ah, yes. May your lips speak truth. May your heart know love. And may the work of your hands be blessed all the days of your life. This child has brought blessings to you, her parents. I now ask you to dedicate yourselves to her. So Ashley and Rachel, will you strive to nurture Ellis in love and wisdom until she blooms into full flower and can care for herself?
And if you would, look in your order of service for the congregational blessing. This concludes our covenant together with these parents and this child. We'll read responsively. I'll start. It is our faith that each child born is one more Redeemer. Are you ready to dedicate yourselves to this child?
We are prepared. We dedicate our minds and hearts to this child and to her parents.
Will you strive to love and cherish her in times of struggle as well as gladness?
We will love and cherish her always.
We acknowledge the divine spark within each child.
May we be worthy guardians of this young life. May we build a community in which she will grow old, surrounded by beauty, embraced by love, and cradled in the arms of peace. Okay. Love you. Love you, Ashley.
Good morning. My name is Roger Lehman. I am a member of this congregation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to worship this morning. Before I continue, let me remind you to please silence your cell phones. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation, we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We deepen our relationship as we create a compassionate, welcoming community nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask you to wear the paper name tags because it helps us to get to know you better. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or just visiting from another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service to have questions answered. People become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you are considering joining the church, please talk to our assistant minister, Holly Miller. Following the service, we hope everyone will enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social area, where you will also find current information about opportunities for engagement and reflection. There are a number of announcements in the weekly bulletin, which I hope you will take home and read, and I have one more. At the most recent NOAA board meeting, member congregations voted 32-1 to endorse an amendment to the Metro budget to increase the property tax rate by 0.5 in order to fully fund the budget, including school requests, long-promised cost of living raises to Metro employees, and maintaining the Barnes Fund for affordable housing. Stop by the social justice table if you would like to send a letter to the Metro Council asking them to vote yes for this amendment this Tuesday. We will have laptops and information available for you to act now. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dan Hiller, and I've been asked to share why I support the church. I thought the best way to do it would be to briefly detail my family's 50-year church involvement in this church and the positive force it has been for us. We joined the church in 1967. I was 12, the middle child with 3 siblings. My parents, Aaron and Phyllis, were UUs in California and immediately joined the church. Both my parents wanted to live in Nashville, my mother to pursue songwriting career full-time, and my father to work as a national sales manager for Genesco. My mother's classical training was immediately needed, and she quickly became the church pianist and later the choir director, both of which were volunteer positions. My mother released an album in 1970, a children's album, and one of the songs, Love's a Circle, was also published in the UU hymnal and sung in churches for many years. My father gave periodic sermons here, and a tradition that went on for the duration of his life. On Sundays, we were always one of the last families to leave because my parents wanted to connect with everyone. The 70s were also a challenging time for our family. My parents divorced and my father was laid off, but the emotional support that they received helped us get through these difficult times. The 70s were also an exciting time to be an adolescent in this church. I regularly and enthusiastically attended our liberal religious youth group called LRY. We were politically and socially active, protesting the Vietnam War and dress codes. Some of us worked in Senator Albert Gore Sr.'s re-election campaign in 1970, and for Barbara Curlin in 1972, a church member who ran for mayor and got 5,000 votes running as an unabashed liberal. We attended LRY conferences across the Southeast 3 times a year, which were great fun. It's 1980, I am single, and I'm early in my teaching career. I am not coming to church on a regular basis, but both my parents continue to separately attend church. My father, still struggling financially, starts selling homemade chicken soup during the social hour to make money to pay his pledge. A few years later, he opens a book stand to sell books about his favorite topics, which included humanism and civil liberties. My father, about that time, began a relationship with Hilda Ratner, whom he would eventually go on to marry. But here's my favorite Father's Day story. it's the holiday season, and my father invites me to a party, and that's where I meet my future wife, Kathy. Thanks, Dad. Kathy and I joined the church in the late 80s with our 2 sons who attend RE classes in Al and make many friendships. They eventually go to the mountain camp every summer, which is a high point of their childhood. It's the early 2000s. Our teenage sons are talented musicians and both regularly play in special music events, including Music Sunday, and in the church rock band, which was called the Intergenerational Orchestra of Rock, or ORC. Our oldest son, Michael, goes on to play gospel music professionally on Sundays in an East Nashville church. And our son, Matt, in his college years, is a counselor at the mountain for 2 years and then 2 more years there as a camp supervisor. I just want to finish by saying that when we recognize that the gifts we receive by being in community exceed the money and time that we donate, then we realize we are not just giving, we are giving back. Thanks.
We have each come here today with joys and concerns that we bring with us from outside these walls. We come with fears and hopes, sadness and relief. We come here to form a community that holds one another, that weaves together both our hope and our despair. At this time, if you like, you may come forward and our lay minister, Jean Klein, can help you place a stone in the bowl of water for the joy or concern that you carry within. If you would like that joy or concern to be shared with the community, then I invite you to fill out the yellow slips of paper that you'll find in your pews and bring them forward to me to be read. May this be a time when you are present with your whole self. Let us hold both these spoken and unspoken joys and concerns as we move into the spirit of prayer. Spirit of community, hear the joys and concerns that we have shared here today. Grant us the strength to move forward, the strength to ask for help, the strength to share with our neighbors. Help us to find our place in our families and in our communities, and help us to learn how our interconnection feeds one another in strength, in creativity, and in love. Spirit of community, help us to lean in to the gathering of creation that is bigger than ourselves. May it be so. The hope of this church is to share a journey of spiritual growth and to live out our faith in this world. We will now take an offering that allows us to enact that faith and growth. We are currently sharing our plate with Tennessee Interfaith Power and Light, and half of the loose cash collected today will go to fund their work in our community. The gifts of this congregation will now be most gratefully received. Our reading today is by Robert Bellah, and it comes from Habits of the Heart, Individualism and Commitment in American Life. We believe that much of the thinking about the self of educated Americans, thinking that has become almost hegemonic in our universities and much of the middle class, is based on inadequate social science, impoverished philosophy, and vacuous theology. There are truths that we do not see when we adopt the language of radical individualism. We find ourselves not independently of other people and institutions, but rather through them. We never get to the bottom of ourselves on our own. We discover who we are face to face and side by side with others in work, in love, and in learning. All of our activity goes on in relationships, groups, associations, and communities, ordered by institutional structures and interpreted by cultural patterns of meaning. Our individualism itself is one such pattern. And the positive side of our individualism, our sense of dignity, worth, and moral autonomy of the individual, is dependent in 1,000 ways on social, cultural, and institutional context that keeps us afloat even when we cannot very well describe it. We are not simply ends in ourselves, either as individuals or as society. We are parts of a larger whole that we can neither forget nor imagine in our own image without paying a high price. If we are not to have a self that hangs in the void, slowly twisting in the wind, these are issues we cannot ignore. As we move into a time of meditative silence, I invite you to reflect on how we belong to one another, how we are all part of the whole. May it be so.
I'd like to invite you to rise in body or in spirit as you're so moved and join in singing hymn number 317, We Are Not Our Own, hymn number 317.
About 12 of us, lay leaders here in the church, and 3 of the staff, we're going to Kansas City next week to our Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, where people from each of the 1,000 congregations theoretically come together and do the national business of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Now, some years, The issues that we talk about are very controversial because we're a very diverse set of congregations. We have our polity is all centered around congregations, and congregations are all over the place, and people have different beliefs. And when we come together, we all like to share our strong individual opinions. So last year, for instance, we centered most of the programming around Black Lives Matter Unitarian Universalists. And we went to a lot of educational workshops on the white supremacy culture. And some of us ate it up. It was just so inspiring to us, and some people hated every moment of it. And there were a lot of very interesting debates, and that continued all year long as we all understood deeper what white supremacy culture really means to us. Well, about 20 years ago, there was just as much debate when people decided to bring Robert Bella, who wrote Habits of the Heart, and the readings were from his book, to come and talk to us about the limits of radical individualism. Because as Unitarian Universalists, we are really good at radical individualism. And I think people were starting to sense that maybe there were some limits to that. So he was helping us see what they were. I was not personally upset by that, but I'll tell you, it was very upsetting. A lot of people disagreed with him. And even though I had come to a point in my life where I understood that community was one of my basic spiritual practices that helped me balance individualism, I understood why so many people were upset. They felt like I had when I left home. I grew up in a household in which individualism was not a value. It just wasn't a value at all. In some ways, it was pre-enlightenment. And there's many places around the world in which we still see that family honor was the highest value, and that everyone in the family worked together to sustain that honor in the culture. And that was more important than individualism. So of course, at 17, I live in a society in which I knew about individualism. I was chomping at the bit to leave home and find out who I was. I had so many questions. I just had no idea who I was. And as I studied in school and fell in love and made new friends and started my first professional jobs, I figured out something that kind of surprised me. I only really learned about who I am in relationship with other people. Now, I was an artist, so I spent a lot of time alone. I was thinking and creating and working on stuff from my inner vision and my inner conscience. And yet, even that was so shaped by culture. I went to art school, and we always had critiques, crits. And they didn't have to be so nastily done. They were always kind of mean. But the whole point of them was to teach you, to keep you accountable to the culture. There were certain cultural standards of skillfulness that you needed to learn. And let's face it, if you are working in an art form that is so totally outside of your culture that nobody has a clue what's going on, it's like babbling to someone and not using language that other people understand. And so you had to understand how what you created had references to other visual history in your culture so that people could understand what you were trying to communicate. So I understood even that most what felt like the most private, personal work had a large culture, was shaped by culture. But I didn't really understand myself or begin to understand myself until I left school. And we went to my husband's hometown. I got my first professional job as a school teacher. And I was at this point in my life where I understood that life was not set up for me to become my full self. But I didn't understand how that worked. I knew that, for instance, when I was in school, they told me, no, you can't major in this, you have to major in that. Or if you don't take art, if you don't become an art teacher, we're going to flunk you out of school. Or, how I was being channeled into certain areas. I did not understand that I had been taught that my only role in life was to be a mother and to be a wife. I didn't understand what that was about. I had no words for it. So it was just these raw feelings. Now I learned that you call that feeling cognitive dissonance. And I'm sure you've all felt cognitive dissonance, that the experience of your life and thoughts kind of clashing with the world around you in different ways. But I was very happy to learn that word. Oh, I know what that is. So when I left school, I moved. All the older women in this town I moved to, it was 1971, they were all into feminism. I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about what feminism was. But all these women in their, I was in my 20s, so all these women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they were all like evangelical. And it was a small enough town that, you were asked to be any young woman was asked to be in a consciousness group by at least 5 people within the first 2 months I moved there. So I joined a consciousness raising group, whatever that was, okay? So there was 12 women, all ages, and we had a list of topics to talk about. And for the first time in my life, I heard people talk about, oh, you were steered into education because you're a woman. Oh, your brothers weren't brought up to be just a father. They actually were brought up to have a career. Oh, you were sexually assaulted and never told anybody because you would be exiled from your community if you did. That's what you were taught. I found out that everybody else had these experiences. I learned to put them into words. Without that community experience, both of people face-to-face and a larger social community of people doing deep thinking about our culture, I would never have begun to learn who I was as an individual. Now, yes, this was big thoughts. How many of us have read books, right? And went, oh my God, that puts into words all these feelings or experiences I've had, no matter what those things that you've been struggling to put into words. But it was also so personal. Now, in those years, I now know, there was no words for it then, that I had complex post-traumatic stress because of violence against me as a woman. And I actually couldn't remember it, so I couldn't put it in words. And so I did things that that were not what I intellectually wanted to do. I was reactive, I was hypervigilant, and I had blackouts. And so I was doing self-destructive things, and I was destructive to people I loved the most. And so in one of these consciousness-raising groups, one of the older women, she took me aside one day, and she started to teach me what accountability really meant. She said, Gail, I'm watching you, and you're hurting yourself and others, and you deserve to learn to take care of yourself. You deserve to go to counseling. This was a whole new idea to me. I had never known anyone who had help in that way. And I did do that. And I started to learn that there was a way to love that was totally different than the way I was taught. When I grew up, I was taught that there was only one kind of love, and it was sacrificial love. And it was very explicit. I was taught that it was your job, and this was gendered, but men and women had different ways that they had to sacrifice. So it was sacrificial for everyone. You had to give of yourself, even if it hurt you, for family honor. And that was just the way it was. I did not know there was another way to love. And this person, Mary, was the first person who started to teach me that love could be a way that people mutually support each other to fulfill themselves as human beings. That it wasn't punitive or giving something up. It was together bringing each other up, helping each other grow and become their full selves. And it was mutual. Now, I was just beginning to learn this. It was a process. But I would not have learned it if I did not have people in my life hold me accountable in loving, supportive ways. And by loving, I shouldn't say that, because sacrificial love, that was loving. My parents and my family, they did love the best they could. That's all any of us ever do. But it wasn't until I walked into a Unitarian Universalist church that I started to be able to put that kind of love into words and integrate it into all the areas of my life, my family, my work, and my development of myself as an individual. I was understanding in my soul, again, this longing that I was learning to be myself. And then one day I woke up and I had this big aha moment. I don't know, I must have had some wild dream, but I really don't remember it at all. I didn't remember it then. I woke up and I just went, oh, I can do things that my family did that I liked. Like, I could go to church. Now, what I didn't understand was that even all that time I thought I was learning all through my 20s to be an individual, I wasn't. I wasn't even listening to what I wanted to do a lot of the time. I was just reacting against my parents and doing the opposite of what they wanted to do. So the real freedom for me to learn to be an individual didn't come until I went, oh, you know, I could choose to do some of the things that they taught me to do, and I could choose not to do some of those things. It was a little much more nuanced. So when I went, I was like, where am I going to go to church, though? I don't want to go to a church that teaches us all this punitive stuff, because that's the kind of church I grew up in. And so I would never have heard of the Universalist Church except for community. I was at a cocktail party that Jim's mother always had on Wednesday nights in the summer outside on the rocks over the ocean in their town. And this man came up to me and he said, I think you would like to go to my church, the Universalist Church in town. I'm like, that's crazy. But I went because I had to, I woke up, I had to go to church. So I went there, and there they were talking about love in this open, mutual way. And they were pulling scriptures and ideas from every religion in the world, Buddhist compassion and love from humanism, and love, mutuality, and love from from Islam and Judaism and Christianity. Somebody lit a candle about all our discord that we're having now. One of the things I remember that one of the old Universalist ministers saying is, we're all going to end up in heaven together anyway. We might as well learn to get along now. Things like that. So by being able to have words and practice, because the practice was covenant. In other words, we agreed with each other that we would be accountable to one another, but in a kind, supportive way. We were accountable to help fulfill each other towards becoming full, loving, just, caring human beings. And that gave a very intentional, conscious practice to bring these ideas that I've been learning from my older friends and advisors to do it better with my family, because we wanted our family to be different. We wanted it to be more mutual. But how do you do that? To bring it to work, to bring it to every area of our lives. So, of course, I became a minister because I did want to bring it to work. And that was a very weird thing for me to decide to do. Everybody's like, why do you want to be a minister? That's so strange. Well, Jim knew the people who knew me the best weren't surprised, but everybody else was totally surprised. And I was the most. I couldn't understand, why do I want to be a minister? I was brought, women weren't ministers when I grew up. It was like, just seemed unconceivable. So my very first year at divinity school, I had this pastoral care class, and we read this book. It was a really strange book. It was called Sparks of Life, and it was about how Hasidic Jewish rebs, they call them, rabbis, rebs, do pastoral care. Now, the Hasidic Jewish people, it totally surprised me. They're mystics. Jewish tradition goes back to the Middle Ages in Eastern Europe, went up to Spain, but lived strongly in Eastern Europe. And they believe in reincarnation. And I had this whole section about why people become rebs. They become rebs because they did something really bad in their last life. And they need to be part of a community where everyone is watching everything they do and holds them accountable to it all. Bingo, that's it. I did something really bad in my last life. I don't know if I believe in reincarnation, but I'm sticking to it. That is, and it is, I've had I'm almost 30-year career now, and that has worked for me. Every time one of you tells me what I should or should not do, I say, thank you. I'm going to not be a minister in my next life, because you are doing such a good job of keeping me accountable. But the accountability that we share with one another is done in covenant. It is done in the spirit of our mutual growth together. Now, yesterday, I did a memorial service for one of our beloved elders, Nancy Ransom, who was a member of this church for 40 years. She was very active in the church many of those years as a lay minister. She was strategic planning. We would ask her to be on strategic planning because everyone trusted her. She was one of our brilliant fundraisers and built our endowment trust. And Nancy was a sociologist. She understood that we are all shaped by our culture, all the communities, be it from family to city to church to nation to world. She understood how institutions shape us, but she also understood the sacredness of each individual. She understood, and she acted on it exquisitely. Each person with such graciousness, honoring that individuality of them. And she did it in a very practical way. She was a sociology professor, but she started the women's studies program at Vanderbilt. So many women came up to me after the memorial service and said, no, she mentored me. She helped me understand this culture that I had to learn to survive in. And she did it in such a loving but understanding way. And then she shaped culture and helped change it. So it was mutual. What I learned from people like Nancy and people like my friend Mary, who gave me that advice so many years ago, who's still one of my dearest advisors and is also in her 80s, I learned that there's a different kind of way to look at sacrificial love. Sacrificial, the word sacrificial actually means to make something sacred. Each one of us, at times in community, has something we want to give to our children, to our loved ones, to our community. That is a gift of ourselves. We take that and we make it sacred by giving it in love to others. Now, that kind of sounds big, so I'm going to give you a really kind of mundane example to show you that this kind of sacrificial love does not have to be going out and martyring yourself in some major way, which is how I was brought up it had to be. I'm very involved in Nashville Organized for Action and Hope, which is a community organizing group that this church belongs to, with 60 other organizations, mostly congregations and unions. And this congregation has been very active in it. It means a lot to many of us. And I love to do some of that work. I believe in their mission to really make this city a better place for everyone, including the poor people who are left behind as the city becomes more, the it city. And the things I love to do the most are being on the task force. I was on the Economic Justice Task Force, and I love working with the workers, going out and negotiating with their bosses and protesting and trying to change laws in the state so they will get paid a living wage. That, to me, is a blast. But it turns out there's plenty of people who want to do that. Nobody wants to do any of the administrative work that actually needs to be done to keep the institution going, to keep those 60 churches communicating. And so when they asked me to be the personnel chair, I was like, but the trouble is I can do it. And I could see that they were having trouble finding somebody who could do it. So for the last couple of years, I've been the personnel chair and, help hire and do evaluations, and it's okay, I can do it. But for me, I had to take this thing that I could do, but not particularly fun, and offer it as a sacrifice. I had to make it sacred for work that I really believe in. So that's just an example. It's just a small little thing. I know that each one of you takes parts of yourself and offers it as sacred to others, out of your own choice, not out of some kind of martyrdom. So I would like to end today by saying that I think all of us learn to be more of who we are by becoming more aware of how communities shape us, how they teach us to love in mutual ways that are good for everyone, and how we then can shape our world so more people have that experience. May it be so.
Please rise in body or in spirit and join in singing our closing hymn number 311, Let It Be a Dance, hymn number 311.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our words until we are together again. The blessing of truth be upon us. The power of love direct us and sustain us. And may the peace of this community preserve our going out and our coming in from this time forth until we meet again. This service is over. Let our service begin again, renewed.